with last time at the very end of this. I'll let you know when we are finished recording, and then we'll be able to just wrap up, and I'll be able to send you on your day. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Friday briefing. This briefing is a weekly executive briefing that we're using as an opportunity to be able to share our expertise with you on remote working. And obviously today is not a typical remote work situation, but we're coming in every week to share tips and tricks, as well as just give you our insights into what's happening in the world of remote work today, given the fact that we're in a pretty extraordinary circumstance. My name is Marianne Snow, and this briefing is supported not only by the Remote Nation Institute, but also by Sophaya. Those two organizations are our sponsors. What I'm going to be focusing on today is I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in terms of people's mental health. And when you're thinking about your staff right at this particular point, just be aware that obviously your staff is pretty much struggling. And if you're not cued into that and you're not thinking about different ways to keep them to actually keep them engaged, then it's going to have a lasting impact for you long term. So we want to make sure that we can focus on different ways to keep that level of engagement, and also really help your folks feel better about a situation that is pretty extraordinary. And so anything that we could do right now to really help folks feel better about what's going on is going to help them from a mental health perspective, and also really help them to be able to move forward with some of the emotional stress that they're feeling right now, just feeling better about it. So we're going to focus on building virtual water coolers. And, you know, when we think about virtual water coolers here at Sophaya, what we're thinking about is different ways that you can create routine touch points and very strategic opportunities to be able to connect with your people and connect in ways that are not only going to have an impact on team productivity, but also have an impact on just the overall morale and mental health of your group. And that's going to be a really important concept right now, because we're 5 weeks in, daycares are closed. This is an extraordinary circumstance, as I'm sure many of you can attest yourself right at this particular point in time. And people are getting weary. They're getting weary. They're anxious. This is the new normal, and they don't like it. They're feeling cooped up, and really keeping themselves on task is a little bit harder, because some of the things we've talked about before, that work-life integration, this is not work-life balance. There's no such thing as work-life balance. I just want to reiterate that. When you're in this circumstance, you're really talking about how do you integrate work and life, very often with 1 or 2 people in the house trying to get work done, when you might have children of all ages also occupying the space. And even if you don't have kids, you could have pets, you can have environmental noise. There's all sorts of things that are now invading that are quite different than what's typical in an average work environment. And so the standards have to change. How we're dealing with stuff has to change. How we're managing our people has to change. So how do we insert humanity and levity and compassion into a remote workday to lighten the mood and not only engage, but unify your team? And then what are touch points? What's a daily touch point look like using the tools of remote work, which is all of the multiple technical channels that are available to you from a communication point of view, so that you can infuse your work with as much humanity as possible and as much compassion as possible. Because let me just tell you, people need compassion right at this point in time. And then how do you use these techniques to drive productivity? So what does remote work look like for the people that we're dealing with? I don't think I have been to any meeting with any client in the recent 2 weeks that hasn't been interrupted by some sort of a personal environmental issue that the professional is dealing with in their occupied workspace. Since everything is shelter in place and everyone's at home, it has been the typical interruption that small children, particularly young professionals who have small children, have to juggle, because without childcare, without daycares, if you have one person or even two people in the home who are trying to get work done, the likelihood that you're going to have somebody wander through your meeting is almost for sure. And we've seen everything in our client meetings, from one of our folks who was sitting at her kitchen table. Her husband didn't realize that she was on a video conference. And he, of course, just came into his kitchen. Well, he happened to be in his t-shirt and boxer shorts because it was early in the morning. Went over to the refrigerator and pulled out, his orange juice or his milk, and took a swig out of the container in full view of every single person who was in this women's meeting. We also have had situations where we have one client who called me in a panic because she's got a 3-year-old who keeps interrupting her status meetings with her senior leaders. And, this is the reality. The reality is you have individuals who are used to being in highly professional environments and presenting themselves in highly professional ways. And now they're faced with, what do I have in my background? If they don't have a professional backdrop like we have here, then they're trying to use the blurred backgrounds or some of the other options that are available in video conferencing tools, which can add levity, but also can be a little uncomfortable depending on the environment. Some of our clients are working in banking. Some of our clients are in financial services. They're in insurance. So the types of backdrops and the types of interruptions that they can tolerate really have to be relaxed right now because of the extraordinary circumstance. And then in addition, the other thing that I had mentioned before is people are getting a screen fatigue. And what's happening is folks are now scheduling so many meetings either on the phone or in front of a video camera that people literally cannot get a break. And so they're sitting in the same place. They're not moving around. They are really being forced from one meeting area to another meeting area, and on that video chat. So by the end of the day, they're completely exhausted, and this has become quite typical. Now, one of the big issues that we're going to ask you to truly think about when you think about how you're interacting with your team today is people are kind of taking stock, and they're noticing the leaders who are working well in this crisis, who are adapting well in this crisis, and who are also honestly acknowledging the circumstances that the individuals on the team are dealing with. And whether that's their emotional reactions to what's going on, whether it's their family dynamics, whether it's, just their own anxiety or stress levels because of their circumstances and what it's taking to get their job done on a routine basis. And one of these days soon, things are going to reopen. And when those things reopen, people are going to remember how you treated them. They're going to remember how they were treated. They're going to remember how they felt. And this is something that you folks should start planning for now. Be conscious of your actions now, because your compassion that you show, the anxiety that you reduce, how you manage things is going to make a big difference later on. We've got clients right now who are really struggling because their senior leadership in their organizations are attempting to micromanage in ways that are really creating stress levels that seem perfectly inhuman. And this is having a big impact not only on morale, but it's also having a big impact on people's capability to be able to focus and actually get things that are mission critical done. And so I want you to absolutely evaluate your approach with your people so that you're, again, utilizing some of the techniques that we've talked about, whether it's reprioritizing work and really being clear about what's mission critical and what's not mission critical, whether you're thinking about um, different ways that you are making accommodations. The woman that I was telling you about who works in a banking situation, who was anxious because her 3-year-old kept interrupting, kept apologizing to her senior leaders. I asked her to go to those senior leaders proactively and talk about it. And one of the things that one of her leadership said was, never apologize for the fact that you're trying to manage your family. That we can accommodate that. That's not an issue. And it immediately reduced her stress level. And this is going to be really important. So, this is a moment where niceties, levity are incredibly important. That senior leader who allowed his banking executive to accommodate her 3-year-old and do it in a way that was accepted is a person who is going to get more out of his team, because he is taking a position where he's acknowledging the reality of the circumstances. And whether we're talking about niceties that are associated with one-on-one situations that you have with your folks, taking the time to ask about that person first. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? How's your family? How are you coping? And whether that's a normal routine for you, or if it's not a normal routine for you, understand that it is a priority for anyone who is leading remote folks today. Because if you're not doing this, then it's going to damage those relationships later on. Because if you can't take care of people in the moment of crisis, then it's going to leave them with a very bad taste in their mouth. And this isn't going to be good for you in the long term, nor is it going to be good for your team, nor is it going to be good for your organization. This also means we're recommending that you use the beginnings of your meetings as well as the ends of your meetings as wisely as possible. And what we mean by that is, if you're kicking off a meeting, use the beginning of all the meetings to just check in with folks and allow for a certain amount of human banter. Think about it. If you were in a meeting room physically together, then there would be a certain amount of exchange before the meeting kicked off, particularly amongst people who know each other. And as the person who's organizing those meetings, think about that and think about ways to kick off your meetings with a little bit of compassion and humanity, so that your folks are really understanding and feeling like you have taken the time to recognize and acknowledge just the realities of the situation. When you're asking first, that also means you got to listen. And so when you're going through those niceties and you're asking about the person, appreciate the fact that you're going to hear people confessing to things, even very stoic people who normally would not share a lot of personal stuff. You're going to hear a lot more than you normally would. Because remember, we are now in a circumstance, because of the amount of video that's being accommodated and the amount of distance stuff that we're doing. In these circumstances, I have seen teams of people who in traditional office areas don't interact and know very little about their coworkers' personal life, now getting intimate glimpses, whether it's a husband walking through in boxer shorts and t-shirt, whether it's a 3-year-old sitting on someone's lap, whether it's a 5-year-old hanging on his mom or dad with his arm around their neck. These things are becoming commonplace. And so whether we're accommodating pets, whether we're accommodating environmental noise, all of this stuff has to be put in proper perspective. Let's keep a sense of humor about this, folks, because this is important. And share your tales too. But the other thing is, people are asking their leaders at this particular moment to be realistic, but be hopeful. And I think that that's an important consideration here. When you're thinking about your remote teams, you can't sugarcoat things. You can't make everything out like this is our new normal, so of course we can overcome this. Because there are people who are feeling pretty overwhelmed. And you have to acknowledge people where they're at. You have to meet them where they are right now. But you also have to help them see hope. You have to help them see the humor in the situation, see the levity in the situation, and really address things in a way that is professional, but also is designed to help them to retain whatever professionalism they can in a circumstance which is out of everybody's control. The other thing that we're recommending that all of our clients do, because we're a multi-channel universe right now, and what I mean by multi-channel is obviously you've got lots of different technical ways to connect with your group by now. 5 weeks in, we've got folks that are utilizing everything from Microsoft Teams to Slack channels, which allow for more informal chat, but we also have people who are using instant messaging or group texting, group distribution lists, so they're doing group texts, and different ways to kind of keep people connected and engaged. When you're doing this, appreciate that you gotta dedicate some channels where people can let loose a little bit. And that means really kind of queuing your group up so that you've set good parameters so that people aren't overstepping boundaries. Because like everything in life, you've got stressed individuals who are working from their homes. And what type of humor is okay, like engineering a crazy hat day versus people introducing off-color jokes that could inadvertently create hurt feelings or the feeling of being disrespected by individuals within the team. What you do want to do is have candid conversations ahead of time so that people aren't surprised or they don't, any sort of use of humor is not misinterpreted. And if you are going to introduce humor into your circumstance, then self-deprecating humor or making light of that sort of universal situation where all of us, are probably dressed differently from the waist down than we are from the waist up right now. All of us are looking a little shaggy because we've missed our hair appointments. All of us need a haircut. All of us are really trying to decide what day it is because a lot of times things look the same. Consider your group dynamic, consider the team culture, consider the amount of trust that you build up with the group right now, and keep reminding people that this is around tolerance and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and really being as respectful as possible. And tell people why this is important. And this is an important consideration because in these circumstances, we absolutely want to make sure that we're creating some sense of normalcy, something that's normal out of a situation that's highly abnormal. Give people options, and this is an important concept when you're thinking about remote work, crisis remote work situations like we have right now. In a normal remote work situation, you would be setting up routine status updates with your people. You would do group meetings. You'd have protocols, all of that sort of stuff. In this circumstance, appreciate that there's an emotionality involved that is highly volatile. And so you got to sit down with your folks and find out. We've got clients that are starting every day out with just a sort of a quick team huddle, something that allows them to be able to get together as a group and create that routine, run through, and it just reminds people what day it is. It reminds people what the priorities are. It helps them to be able to share information. We've got folks who are running weekly live stream town halls where we've got one individual who is speaking to a whole group of folks. It could be, we've got one organization that we're doing a town hall where we routinely have between 150 and 200 people attending. And we're putting the leader on video, and the group is submitting questions in advance, and then we do some ad hoc Q&A. And so think about what's best for your team and get that team involved early so that you can have those conversations with them and figure out what works for them. Some people want one-on-one time, some people want those group things, and some people are going to want to self-segregate, and you're going to have to balance because you can't let people self-isolate themselves. You got to see what resonates with your group. You got to encourage people on a person by person basis. And then remember, we've asked you to kind of think about ways to pair individuals up so that individuals have an opportunity to work together in ways that maybe if they're not talking to you, they might actually talk to their buddy. But take it slow, get people used to the idea that these touch points have a bigger meaning and that they're part of the strategic plan that you have for not only keeping the group together, but also making sure that they get what they need. This is the moment where you need to facilitate a tolerant and inclusive atmosphere. Learn to read your people. Know when they need a break. There's a point in time where you're pushing for productivity and a point in time when you can't. And towards the end of the week, on Thursdays and Fridays, we're asking people to think about ways that they can build in some sort of an informal mechanism for getting together. And we have all sorts of great examples. We have folks that are doing virtual lunches. We had a group that was on their corporate credit card, had actually ordered lunch for everybody through like a Grubhub service or some sort of a food delivery service. So everybody got lunch at the same time, regardless of their time zone. They're all on a video chat, but it's not about doing business. It's actually about kicking back. We've had all sorts of examples of different ways that people are allowing for safe places for people to come together and let off a little steam. You have to provide the opportunities for this because in a normal office, when you're thinking about any sort of a social interaction, sometimes it happens more spontaneously. And in remote work situations, it has to be more choreographed. You have to provide the opportunities. You have to encourage people to participate. You have to tell them why it's important. Be persistent, be consistent, and let's not take ourselves too seriously. That's going to be really important. But using humor selectively, so that self-deprecating humor, using yourself as a great example. And then once you've got a routine, get other people involved. You should not be the only social director for the group. How do you encourage other folks to come up with interesting ideas on their own? I guarantee you, if you go out and you're talking to your group, someone will come up with something. We've got a situation where we actually have somebody who is running a story time for kids between 3 and 5 every single day. And it's just a little respite for families who have children, and it allows for folks to have, routine contact, which is really, really important. You want to stay involved, but you also want to be appropriate and make it inclusive so that people aren't going off into small cliques that are actually keeping the team separated as opposed to together. And we talked about the buddy system. And I'm going to again say to you, you can't do this all yourself. Remember that water cooler moments. If you're bumping into someone in the kitchen at the office or the water cooler at the office, that's often spontaneous. But remote work requires more coordination on your part. So look for ways to consciously pair people and then help them see the benefit of those partnerships. Have them report back to you frequently as a unit, so they're talking together as a pair. Have them work on things together. We talked about, if you've got a remote worker who's experienced and someone who isn't experienced, we've talked about that in previous briefings, but we're going to encourage you to think about different ways that you can take more experienced and less experienced people with different backgrounds, different expertise, and strategically link them. And then help them to navigate misunderstandings. Your team is highly emotional and highly charged at the moment. So please, please, please remember that you also have to mediate with your folks and help them to look for ways to be able to get past those stressful moments, give people the benefit of the doubt, and really prepare them for the fact that that this is something that's extraordinary that nobody planned for. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, excuse me 1 second while I end our slideshow. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and see if anybody in the audience has questions that they'd like to talk about today. If you do have a question, please just let me know, and I will absolutely get you. I will absolutely get you in the order that they come in the chat box. So, Zher, I've got Zher Liu. Zher, can I answer your question today?
Yes, thank you, Mary. So I have a question. Many of my team members are currently without childcare, and that's impacting their productivity. How do we overcome this?
Could you repeat the question for me one more time, Zher?
Oh, sorry. So many of my team members are currently without childcare, and that's impacting their productivity. How do we overcome this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first thing that I would say to you is appreciate the fact that you can't make this You can't make this go away. This is something that is out of everybody's control. And so showing some humor and also normalizing it. I don't think that there's been any meeting that hasn't happened where I've heard snoring dogs. I've seen small children enter. We had one meeting with a whole group of individual physicians. We had 30 physicians in the rooms, and a little 3-year-old came and sat on her mom's lap and was making faces at the camera. And the more that we can put this in proper perspective, the more that we can normalize this, and the more that we can make it okay for the poor people who are dealing with this, and the easier it's going to be for them to be able to really kind of focus on the question at hand, as opposed to the fact that they've got a small child on their lap, and that child is asking for some attention. So that's going to help with productivity, because it's going to reduce stress. And if you can reduce stress, then people are going to be able to focus easier. So thank you, Jer. Yupong, you have a question for me.
Yes, Mary, I have a question. I have a virtual team, and several members on my team, maybe they're just too shy. They don't really, they're not very social. And how can I encourage them to reach out and to speak during our social or virtual meeting event?
Yeah. So I think what you have to, excuse me about my audio here, but I think what you have to do is, when you have really shy people, appreciate the fact that you're going to have to invite them into the conversation differently. And so one of the things that I would say is have conversations with them one-on-one, talk to them in advance, help them to prep. So if you are going to bring them together in a group, give them a role, allow them time to prepare for that role. Let them know that they can anticipate that you're going to call on them. And then be consistent, because in this particular situation, you're never going to make that person probably feel comfortable. But what you can do is you can at least give them the respect of preparing them in advance, which gives them a little bit more opportunity. It gives them a little bit more opportunity to be able to mentally prepare for things. So that's what we would recommend. Do I see a question from Chi Bing?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me now? Hey, Mary. So what I can see from the team is that before this happened, the company already talking about some also outsourcing some of the jobs and stuff. So after this happened, especially right now, more and more people get concerned about this, and I kind of feel like this is something drifting the team kind of apart a little bit. And then, so what do you think? Like as a team, we can stick stronger and together at this point.
Yeah. So, Chi Bing, one of the things that we're actually talking to all our clients about right now is the fact that you have to start prepping for getting these people back together. Folks are going to find that this has been a really disruptive experience for them, and depending on how the team has functioned while it's out on remote work. And I mentioned earlier that we have a situation where we're trying to help a group navigate the fact that their senior leaders are being very micromanaging to the point where it seems really, really inhuman. And part of the reason that we're saying to people, be very, very careful about how you're navigating this particular circumstance, because people are going to remember how you treated them, and that's going to impact their morale when they get back into the office. So a couple of things. I would say that if you can start applying some of the techniques we talked about today, you know, that levity and the compassion. But the other thing is, if you, as a leader, somebody who is actually leading a team of people, appreciate that your tone of voice has a big impact on other people's tone of voice. So how are you acting as a role model? And if you're a member of that team, as opposed to the leader of that team, you still are a role model in terms of tone of voice and how you treat other folks and how you manage the daily stresses, right? In terms of disagreements or misunderstandings or negotiating with individuals who seem to be struggling, reaching out and having compassion. And so the more that you can think about ways that either through your role as a team leader or even as a team member, the more you can think about ways that you can set a good example and role model good behavior and think about the best ways to talk to people. And sometimes that means talking to people offline, one-on-one, whether that's your manager or coworkers, and find out what's driving their behavior. What you might be seeing as an emotional response might actually be related to the fact that somebody is experiencing something that they haven't been able to acknowledge. And if you gave them a chance to talk it through with you, it will relieve the stress and help with that behavior. It will help them to moderate their behavior in the future. So those are some of the things that I would recommend to you, Brett, at this point in time. So
Thanks.
thank you very much for your question. So I see I have another question here from Kim.
Hold on. Thank you. Hi, Marianne. Thank you. So I had a question. Do you think that it's okay? I know you sort of answered part of this, but I was thinking about reaching out to people individually about individual work. And then I started thinking how sometimes people can feel funny, like, oh, my boss reached out to so-and-so, but not to me. And I mean, could that lead to issues? Do I have to be more transparent with people in the sense that I'm going to be reaching out to some of you individually, just so you know, or am I overthinking this?
So great question, Kim. And there's a couple of things. I would say that, you know, one of the things that we talked about several weeks ago in briefings was we talked about really coming together as a group to come up with very specific protocols for how you're going to operate it as a team right now. If you were in a normal remote work situation, these would have been things that you had hammered out in agreement before you actually started to engage in remote work. And because this has been an evolving situation, one of the things that we've observed that, you know, coming up with, you know, your protocols early on, but then not tweaking, you know, assuming that everything is going to run the way you thought it was going to run theoretically, and then bumping into the reality because it's an evolving situation. You might have built your protocols before everybody lost their daycare or before all of the schools went on suspension. So have you adjusted? And I think, Kim, to your point, I think transparency is going to be really important, and you should be saying to the entire team, I'll be doing lots of check-ins. Some of them are going to be group check-ins. Some of them are going to be individual check-ins. If I'm sensing somebody struggling, you're going to hear from me. If I'm sensing that, you know, there's work issues that seem to be happening, then I'm going to check in with you and normalize it. And I think that that's really important. As long as people understand the whys, and as long as they don't think that you're contacting them to you know, discipline them in some ways. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't discipline somebody who is inappropriate. I think you have to do that. I think you have to have a quiet conversation with them off to the side. And I think you have to be honest with them about how their behavior is impacting other people. But at the same time, I think you also have to have compassion, because some of the reasons that people might be struggling is because something is going on that you might not be aware of. And so I think you have to be a little bit of both. And I think you have to appreciate your role right at this point in time. You have to be team psychologist, but also remember, I've asked you to kind of think about ways to pair people up. And so even if you're not dealing with someone, if you're not getting a good vibe from someone, if you know that they're particularly close to someone else on the team, maybe you can use that person's relationship to help you understand what's driving the behavior. So those are things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kyle, you have a question?
Hi, yeah, I have a question. So when you're working with a large international team, there's already like a lot of different issues that you have to deal with, being the time zones and all those other things. But I'm wondering, so with the pandemic hitting certain countries more than others, I just wonder, how do you, would you recommend balancing some of those additional restrictions that some people are having, whereas China's being allowed to be more, things are lifting there, but obviously other parts of the country are not having that. So I just wonder, how do you deal with those different issues?
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. That's a great question. We actually have some organizations. We work with some organizations that have both international as well as national teams. So they've got time zone considerations they have to juggle, but they also we also have clients in our portfolio who have international issues, and so the biggest thing I would say to you folks is, remember, a time zone in this particular crisis situation has potentially different implications. In the best of times, when you're juggling time zones, you got to be conscious of the fact that your time zone may not be someone else's time zone. We were doing a meeting at 9 o'clock this morning, and some of our colleagues are on the West Coast. Well, our 9 o'clock meeting is their 6 a.m. meeting. So appreciate that if you're going to ask someone to come into a meeting at 6 a.m., there better be a darn good reason for it. And it probably shouldn't be your natural go-to. And so just being consciously aware, you know, China is 13 hours ahead, or actually a little less than that. But, you know, but it's, you know, depending on who you're talking to in the world, you got to be very conscious of what the time zone implications are. You also have a second piece, which is if you have groups of people who don't speak the same language as their primary language, and you're asking them to come together as a thinking group, then you need to prepare in advance. So and that means you got to tell people ahead of time what you're asking of them. You've got to give them an opportunity to have the materials in advance so that they can prepare, and they can prepare appropriately. And you also have to really let them know where they are on the agenda, because remember, if you're going to talk over a communication channel and you're going to talk in your second language, then you have to translate the response, you have to think about it, you have to formulate your response, and then you have to retranslate it so that you can state it to the group. And people can't do this in a spontaneous way. So you got to give them time in advance so that they're going to be able to participate in the conversation effectively. But Kyle, I think probably the most important thing when you're dealing with international teams in a crisis situation like this is that there are universal themes. Regardless of where you are right now, parents are worried about their children. Folks are juggling a lot of things. There's a lot of anxiety and concern. So there are big universal themes right now that will bring your team together. And so the more that you can treat your team like a global team, and the more that you can think like a global leader as opposed to a local leader, and really think about what's happening in that person's locale, what's their circumstance, keep yourself abreast of what's going on, but also think of your team as as one group of humans that are probably juggling with very similar circumstances. And I think that that's going to be really important. So question, any other questions? Do we have any other questions in the group? Well, that's great. Thank you so much for all of your participation today. We really, really appreciate it. We want to encourage you to come to our briefing again next week. We're holding these every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we hope to see you next week when at that particular point, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to talk about how do you keep a remote team on the same page? Because obviously, if people are working in their own individual work areas, that can be a real issue. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, everybody. And please be safe, be well, and take good care.